Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good weekend and welcome back to Sea Power, Naval Combat and the Missile Age. So, in the Sea Power video that I did earlier this week, I was defending the US territory of Guam from a Soviet invasion force. And a number of people were asking, are there any actual Soviet scenarios included in this game? And yeah, there are. You can actually do that very scenario, but from the Soviet perspective. And that's what we're going to be doing today. It's not exactly the same though. In fact, a lot of these scenarios come with inbuilt variables. So even if you play the same scenario from the same perspective, it's not necessarily going to play out exactly the same way. But even bearing that in mind, playing this one from the Soviet perspective came with one very big surprise. The Soviets didn't have one of those when I was playing this the other day from the American perspective. That's a Kiev-class aircraft carrier. Well, I mean, calling it an aircraft carrier is a bit of an insult to actual aircraft carriers, and more on that in a bit. But for now, here's the scenario. We're invading Guam. There's our invasion point. We already know that there's an E-3 AWACS aircraft airborne, and it probably already knows that we're coming. So, our forces split into two groups. We have the strike group built around the Kiev here, which is going to be clearing the way for the amphibious assault group that's bringing up the rear. So, Kiev-class aircraft carrier. It's not an aircraft carrier. It's a helicopter carrier that also happens to have some really, really bad vertical takeoff and landing Yak-38 fighters. As far as its defences are concerned, it has the SAN-3 Goblet, which is a pretty tasty, medium-range surface-to-air missile. It's not a bad system. It also has the SAN-4 Gecko, which is more of a short-range point defence missile system, but again, it's a very good missile system. Speaking of missiles, yes, those are SSN-12 Sandbox supersonic sea-skimming anti-shipping missiles. The Kiev carried 8 of these things forward of the flight deck. Look at that's a 300 kilometre range. Oh wait, no, that's a 300 nautical mile range. That's actually a 550 kilometre range. These things are absolutely evil, and the Russians put them on their aircraft carriers. Actually, they put them on everything. Every spare piece of deck that could hold a missile tube on a Russian warship generally had a missile tube. She also has anti-submarine mortars, which are primarily used to defend against torpedoes. She also has torpedoes, and she has guns. She has more guns, although these are the point defense guns, and she's got a lot of those as well. So, yeah, it's a very, very well-armed... Well, I don't want to say aircraft carrier, because it isn't one. And you'll understand why when we take a look at its aircraft. Here it's aircraft, the Yak-38 Forger, a poor man's copy of the Hawker Harrier. That, the AS-7 Kerry, is allegedly a standoff air-to-surface missile, but it only has a range of 5.4 nautical miles, and it has to be visually guided to the target by the pilot. And yeah, if you're that close to an American warship, well, you wouldn't get that close to an American warship on one of these things, so these things basically have no strike capability. What the Kiev does have is lots and lots and lots of very useful helicopters. The Kamov 25, which is basically a submarine hunter. I mean, the Kievs were essentially just bigger versions of the Royal Navy's Invincible class carriers, which were helicopter carriers, and also carried vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. The Sea Harrier. The thing is, the Sea Harrier was actually pretty good. The Yak-38, not so much. But the Kiev's helicopters are good. She carries a mix of Ka-25s and Ka-27s. She's got much more Ka-27s. She primarily uses the Ka-25s for submarine hunting or submarine search, laying sonar buoys. And the Ka-27s can also do that, but they tend to be used as the submarine hunters, loaded with torpedoes. So anyway, that's the Kiev. That's not all we have. But before we look at the other big gun, well, bigger gun, I wanted to take a quick look at the Slava-class missile cruiser. You see what I mean? About the Soviets just stacking missile racks on every spare piece of available deck. So yeah, as well as the usual array of surface-to-air missile launchers, the Slava also carried the SSN-12 Sandbox supersonic sea-skimming anti-shipping missile. This is the one with the 550 kilometre range. and the Slava carries 16 of them. The other ships in the Escort group, we've got a bunch of these Krivak II class frigates. Now, the SSN-14 Silex is technically a standoff surface-to-surface missile, but it isn't. It's basically a torpedo with a rocket attached. It's a tool for getting a torpedo onto a submarine at a comfortable distance from the defending unit. It can technically be used against ships, but no. And then we get the other big boy. This is a Kirov-class battlecruiser. It is, in fact, the actual Kirov. It's the lead ship of the class, and she is armed with the terrifying SSN-19 shipwrecks. These things have a 700-kilometer range, and she carries 20 of them. Now, they're not as fast as the SSN-19s, but they're still faster than harpoons, and they have 6 times the range. The Kirov also has extremely potent missile defences with 96 SAN-6 and 40 SAN-4 surface-to-air missiles. She's a tough nut to crack. As far as the rest of the escorts are concerned, we've got a couple of Krivak II class frigates, but we also have another relatively heavy hitter, largely due to the missiles that it carries. This is a Sovereign class destroyer, and it is armed with the SSN-22 Sunburn anti-shipping missile, which only has a 250 kilometer range. And yes, it's supersonic too, and in its terminal phase it actually flies in a sort of yo-yo pattern to dodge close-in weapon systems. Meanwhile, bringing up the rear, this is the Amphibious assault group. We have a bunch, there's another Sovereign. We have a bunch of escorts, and these are the prize, the Rapucha class landing ships. They only have a top speed of 16-17 knots, which means that the assault group is limited to that speed. The strike group, however, has no such limitations. Every ship in that force is capable of at least 32 knots. And I know that much from experience. I don't need to look at the unit reference card. When I was on board HMS Brazen, we were detailed off to shadow a Kirov-class battlecruiser as it exited the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar and headed up through the Atlantic on the way back to Murmansk. And I know that thing can do 32 knots, because it did, and we couldn't. Or at least not for more than a couple of hours, not without shaking our engines apart. You see, a Type 22 frigate, which is what HMS Brazen was, actually has 4 engines. It's got 2 cruising engines and 2 sprinting engines. The cruising engines are Tyne gas turbines, and the sprinting engines are Rolls-Royce Olympuses. Just to put this into context for you, you know the supersonic airliner, Concorde? That was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Olympuses. Type 22 frigates carried 2 of them. And those things could go fast. They could do 30, 31, maybe 32 knots, depending on the state of the hull. They just couldn't do it for very long. Because when that thing was running at full tilt, it inhaled fuel. And of course, the Kirov-class battlecruiser has a nuclear power plant, so fuel is a non-issue. So they could quite happily tool along at 32 knots, just laughing their asses off at us as we struggled to keep up with them, knowing that we couldn't maintain that speed for long. Hey, at least they saw the funny side. We weren't laughing, though. That cost us a visit to Gibraltar, and some genius at Northwood said, "Who do we have nearby who can follow a Kirov?" So what I'm doing here is messing around with the formation editor, because the default formation that the battle group started off in is absolutely terrible. All of the ships were way too close together, and the Kiev was way too close to the front of the formation. So instead, I'm putting the Kiev right at the back, the Kirov a good 12 to 15 kilometers ahead of it, and then I'm pulling in the other escorts. The Kirov a good 15 to 20 kilometers ahead of it, flanked by the Slava and the Sovereign, and then my less useful surface units, the Krivak II class frigates, right up front. You don't want your high value units like the Kirov or the Kiev anywhere near the sharp end of the threat axis, because they'll just be the first ones to take hits. Now, it's true that the Krivaks, with their extremely short-range surface-to-air missiles, are probably going to get overwhelmed. Unfortunately, the harsh reality of the matter is that's kind of their job. They're the escorts. There's a YouTuber covering sea power called Ryu1940. He was a former sensor operator on board the US Navy's Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates, and he did a very good video. I'll see if I can remember to put a link to it, explaining the concept of the missile sponge. A missile sponge is basically, well, it's a sacrificial unit that sails at the head of the force and sponges up all the missiles. Ideally, you'll shoot all of those missiles down before they hit the missile sponge, but realistically, you're going to get leakers. Some of those missiles are going to get through. And you don't want them to hit a valuable unit. That's what escorts are for. And you want that unfortunate missile sponge to be as far ahead of the force as possible, while still being within the defensive bubbles of the rest of the force's surface-to-air missile batteries where possible. Now that's fine if you've got ships like Kievs and Kirovs and Slavas that have surface-to-air missiles with a 40 to 50 nautical mile range. But the surface-to-air defences on the Krivak 2s only have something like a 10 nautical mile range. So the natural inclination is to cluster everybody within 10 nautical miles of each other so they can all defend each other. But this is a very, very bad idea. Because if you give incoming missiles a choice of targets, they will pick their choice of targets. You want them all to be going for the missile sponge. You don't want to give those incoming missiles a choice of multiple targets to go for, because they will go for multiple targets, and now you've got to split your defensive fire. You want all of those missiles homing in on the missile sponge at the front of the force, so you can focus all of your defensive fire down a single threat axis. It does sound counterintuitive, because the natural inclination is to cluster all of your forces as close together so that even the Krivak 2s with their 10 nautical mile range surface-to-air missiles can defend each other, but the only thing that's going to guarantee is that more than one ship gets hit, and you might lose some of your high-value units. And defending the high-value units is what the escorts are for, and that means using a missile sponge. But don't worry, you don't have to take my word for it. You'll see it happen. Anyway, a couple of 100 kilometres out, we've got some air contacts. We've got one small air contact, which I'm pretty sure is a helicopter, but we've also got a couple of medium air contacts that I'm relatively sure are B-52s, because I've already played this scenario from the US perspective a couple of days ago. And those B-52s are a significant threat because they're armed with 12 harpoons each. Now the harpoon actually outranges my best surface-to-air missiles, which only have a 50 nautical mile range, and the harpoon can be launched from 56, 58. And I was able to exploit this very successfully when I was playing this from the American perspective. But this time around I have an aircraft carrier, even though it's not actually an aircraft carrier. We're going to see exactly what use the Yak-38 Forger is in the air intercept role. I'm not expecting great things, because amongst other things, the Yak-38 doesn't have radar. And if it doesn't have radar, that means it doesn't have radar-guided beyond visual range missiles. It's armed with the Soviet equivalent of the Sidewinder, which means it has to get real close to shoot something down. And those B-52s are flying really high and really far away. And one of the other very bad things about the Yak-38 is that it has extremely short legs. It doesn't have an awful lot of range. And it's also kind of slow. So trying to intercept B-52s armed with harpoons with Yak-38s is kind of like playing chicken, because if you try to engage them early, the Yaks won't have the range to get there. And if you try to engage them late, the B-52s will get the harpoons away. The Yaks are climbing, doing their best possible speed, which isn't particularly fast. They're at around 20,000 feet. The problem, of course, is that the B-52s are at 30,000. And, in fact, we have surface-to-air missiles being launched from the Surface Action Group. You can see the B-52's contrails up there. That's how far away... Yeah, the Yaks are never going to catch them. The question is, can we intercept them with the SAN-6 before they launch their harpoons? I mean, realistically, we shouldn't. They should be able to launch the harpoons quite safely and then vector away before they get caught by the SAN-6. I mean, you can see they still have the harpoon load. And honestly, I've got no idea why they haven't already launched. There goes the chaff. Yep, taken out by SAN-6. Oh, and the Yaks did get the other one with the heat seekers. I did not expect that. Oh well, good job. Don't know why the B-52s didn't launch the harpoons though. They should have been within range. And now, of course, we've got this other re-emma mission, which I'm fairly sure is a helicopter. But the Yaks don't have the range anymore. They've burned all their fuel climbing to intercept the B-52. I mean, the helicopter, it's probably an SH-2. It's not a huge threat. It'll be loitering around out there doing surface search. But we've already been picked up by the AWACS that's orbiting Guam, so they already know we're coming. Well, sometime later we have confirmed that that small airborne EM mission is in fact an SH-2 helicopter. But there's also a surface contact about 50 kilometers behind him. And I don't know what it is. We've picked it up with the airborne surface search radars from the Ka-27 helicopters. I've ordered the helos up to 6,000 feet to expand their radar horizon and try and get a better idea of what that is behind the SH-2. And I've sent another pair of Yak-38s out to try to swat down this enemy helicopter. You see that blue circle around the Yak-38s on the tactical display? That's their range until bingo fuel. That helicopter is about 150 miles away from the force. And these alleged naval interceptors don't have the range to intercept a helicopter 150 nautical miles away from the force. They are beyond terrible. Now, as for that surface contact, I don't have a lot to go on. I know it's speed, and that's about it. But it is heading right at us, and it does have a military helicopter performing a patrol sweep right in front of it. So, yeah, that's good enough. The second I classified that as hostile, the Kirov, the Sovremeny, and the Slava all let it have one missile each. So this is going to be interesting. I'm just going to let this play out. One missile each from my three big hitters, because I don't know what that target is. It's probably a cruiser of some description. And it's the only contact that I've actually detected. We've got no other surface contacts, even after I've ordered my Ka-27s to climb to 6,000 feet to extend their radar horizon. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And in fact, I might have committed a bit of an oopsie. Because if it is alone out there, well, if it was part of a US Navy surface action group, it wouldn't be alone, would it? But I'm kind of committed now, because once Mr. Missile has left the launch tube, he is no longer your or anybody else's friend. So this is the SSN-12 launched by the Slava. This is a very, very fast weapon. I think the Sovremeny launched one of these as well. The Kirov launched an SSN-20, which is still fast, it's just not as fast as these. So the Kirov's missile is definitely going to get there last, and there might not be anything left for it to hit. I mean, this is the exact opposite of trying to overwhelm the target's missile defences, because I've just let the AI do it. Oh, here we go. So they will have detected these missiles on radar, but they're about to lose them as they drop to sea skimming altitude. These Russian missiles, man. The Soviets unquestionably had better missiles than NATO. I mean, Harpoon's a good missile, but it's comparatively slow. Actually really slow by comparison. And it doesn't have a fraction of the range. Oh, here it comes. No defensive missile launch. These things have their own onboard electronic countermeasures. They will try to jam... Oh, intercepted by Seawiz. Score one for the good guys. I'm still not... Oh wait, there. That's our first defensive missile launch. Yeah. Day late and $1 short. That's one missile hit, and he is already written off. And there's still the SSN-20 from Kirov on the way. Although at this point you're kind of flogging a dead horse, really. I mean, that's one enemy cruiser on the way to the bottom. You see, these Russian missiles actually have their own onboard electronic countermeasures. They will try to jam your fire control radar. Absolutely evil. There's the SSN-19, late to the party. I mean, it is supersonic, but it's not as fast as the other two. The thing is, when they're coming in at this kind of altitude and this kind of speed, your fire control, especially when they're actively trying to jam your fire control radar, you can't lock onto them, because US Navy defensive missiles, in fact most of NATO's defensive missiles, are semi-active. You have to get a radar lock on the target in order to be able to launch a missile. I mean, there are other target illuminators, infrared, visual, but they're not as precise. When something's coming in this fast and this low, you're probably not going to be able to start shooting at it until it's at the most 8 or 9 nautical miles away. And this is why you have a missile sponge. Well, let's be generous and call it a radar picket. Somebody out ahead of the force, with their radars burning and turning, detecting these things far enough out that everybody else has a chance of shooting them down. Although I don't think that's what was happening here, because that looked like an extremely expensive and valuable cruiser, not the kind of thing that you would put out on radar picket duty. Meanwhile, Itchy and Scratchy and the Yak-38s look like they might actually be able to get close enough to that SH-2 to do something about it before running out of fuel and falling into the ocean. And we have picked up further surface contacts. Although I haven't classified them as hostile yet, even though based on where they are and what speed they're going and their course, they're probably hostile. And I don't want to classify them as hostile, because then the Kirov and the rest of the big boys will start launching missiles, and I want to do it myself. Hey! Nice shot, comrade. Now quick, get back to the Kiev before you run out of fuel and fall out of the sky. So, I've got a bunch of service contacts that I'm confident are hostile, but without classifying them as hostile and having the task force shoot at them themselves, I'm going to salvo fire. Oh, look at that. There's the thumbnail right there. 4 missiles each. And you'll get to see what these things can actually do. Same deal from the perspective of the Slava. Look at those twin boosters. The Slava's actually launching from further away, and it's launching at a target that's also further away, but its missiles are almost twice as fast as the ones launched from the Kirov, so they'll probably get there first. So here are the Kirov's SSN-19 shipwrecks, and that's the NATO designation, by the way, and when your enemies call your missiles shipwrecks, you know they mean business. And here are the faster SSN-12 sandboxers launched by the Slava. The Sovereign's SSN-22 Sunburns are faster still. And while all of these missiles have certain tricks up their sleeves, it's these SSN-19 shipwrecks that are just crazy good. Ah, there, did you see that? One of the missiles is going up while the others are diving. Wait for it. So they're dropping down now. That one's going up, right? You see that? All of these missiles will do this. That missile's going up to act as a spotter with its own active radar systems, which means that even if you detect the launch, once they enter this phase, you'll lose sight of all but one of those missiles. And if you shoot that missile down, another missile will take its place and feed targeting information to the ones that are zooming in at supersonic speeds at sea level. And they'll sort targets out amongst themselves. They're not like the Harpoon, which will just go for the... the Harpoon has something of a mind of its own, but it generally will just go for the biggest target that it can see. These things discriminate, and the SSN-19s in particular, as well as that, they have their own electronic countermeasures on board. They'll try to jam your fire control radar. They have their own decoys, and they're armoured against close-in weapon systems and any missile fragments that don't quite score a direct hit. I mean, they are just ridiculously good missiles. Don't get me wrong, the Harpoon's a decent weapon system, but the Soviets unquestionably had the better missiles during the Cold War, and still do. I mean, sure, as well as Harpoon, we've got Tomahawk. And Tomahawk's good, but it's slow, and it's not as clever as these things. We should be starting to see some defensive fire. Yep, here it comes. No missiles yet. Okay, one of them got spoofed. There's still 3. That was a hit. And a secondary, yep, that's a kill. A single SSN-19. That's all it takes. And you are done. Let's have a look at the SSN-12s. I think I've seen a missile launch there. Certainly defensive fire, but look at how close they've gotten. Yeah, well, day late and a dollar short again. That looks like the Belknap class. So that's another missile cruiser gone. Not having everything our own way though, because there is at least one surface contact out there that we did not detect. And there were about to be some harpoons incoming. Yep, there they are. And look how close they got before we spotted them. You now get to see the missile sponge in action. That one Krivac 2 ahead of the force. There's more harpoons coming in from here. I mean, I think we're basically picking up their tracking radar, but we don't have a precise fix on them. But we know they're coming. So this Krivac 2 at the head of the force. This is the one they're all going for, because right now, remember, the Harpoon has an active radar homing seeker head. But it's at sea level, so it can't see very far. Which means it's going to go for whatever it can see. Which is why you only give it a choice of one thing to go for. Now the Krivac's attempting to defend itself. And of course the rest of the force are also going to attempt to defend it. I think we're going to pop some chat off here. I think we got one intercept there, but I mean there's obviously more than one. There's more incoming. Missiles are out. One leaked through. But there's more missiles out. We are probably going to lose the Krivac, but there's an intercept. 2 more incoming. Yeah, 1 hit. One of those harpoons did actually see the Kirov and was going for it, but that got intercepted before it even passed the Krivac. The other 3 all went for the Krivac and we intercepted 2 of them. Only 1 got through. We've lost the Krivac. But that's the Escort's job. That's the harsh reality of naval warfare. You try to defend everything, you end up defending nothing. That's why you use a missile sponge. And I know it's not like it kind of sucks, it really does suck if you're on the ship that's designated radar picket right on the outskirts of the formation, 50 kilometres away from the high value unit, intermittently turning your radar on and off to, well, get some kind of warning if there's anything nasty heading your way, and also being the one that gets detected first. But, well, that's the Escort's job. It's better to lose an Escort than a carrier or a battleship. Frigates are cheap. Aircraft carriers, not so much. There is another radar contact out there. It's about 46 nautical miles away from the centre of the force. And something just launched those harpoons at us. The thing is, the timing of the harpoon attack is a bit iffy. I mean, harpoon's not a particularly fast missile. They could have been launched by the ships that I just sank. They just got them away before my missiles arrived. Or it could be whatever that thing is down there, and it's right in the way of the force. But the thing is, it's only doing 7 knots, and that's not a typical warship speed. The only information I have on it is the radar return from one of the radar pickets, the Ka-27 helicopters that I'm using. Based on the limited information that I have, it could be absolutely anything. See, unfortunately, the helos don't have radar warning receivers. They don't have electronic surveillance equipment. So this helo could be on somebody's radar screen right now and I wouldn't know anything about it. The rest of my force is just too far away to be picking up any ESM radiation. So I'm sending one of the healers in to get a visual ID. I mean, it's only doing 7 knots. I mean, that's slow even for a merchant. So I'm moving the Ka-27 in for a closer look. Well, that was rude. Okay. I'm going to designate you as hostile. Don't know what that was, but the Ka-27 just got shot down from a range of about 50 nautical miles, which probably means he got hit by an SM-1. So let's shoot back, shall we? I think we'll give the Slava a turn. I don't think we've actually seen this. Oh, that's very pretty, isn't it? I don't think we saw the Slava fire its missiles. Oh wait, no, that dual booster thing. Yeah, we did watch the Slava fire its missiles. It's the Sovereign we haven't actually seen launching yet. Anyway, whatever that is, it's getting 4 of these buggers. That should be enough. I know I keep going on about how good these Soviet missiles are, and they are very, very good missiles, and they massively outrange their American counterparts, the Harpoon. America does have the Tomahawk cruise missile, of course, which has a fantastic range, but in the time period that this game is set, up until 1985, very few US Navy surface units were actually equipped with Tomahawk. That all changed from 1986 on, when pretty much every US Navy warship that could was fitted with a vertical launch system, rather than the twin rail launch systems that they're all equipped with in this game. The VLS system was a massive game changer for the US Navy, because it not only allowed them to carry more missiles of different types. You can fit a Tomahawk into a VLS cell just as easily as you can fit a Harpoon or an SM-2ER, which obviously gave the US Navy surface fleet much longer range firepower with those Tomahawks, but also the vertical launch system allows you to launch more than 2 missiles at the same time. They could get massive salvos of defensive and offensive missiles away very, very quickly. The thing is, while in the time period covered by this game, unless you've got something like an Iowa-class battleship at your disposal, you're probably not going to have access to Tomahawks, so you're going to be limited to the 58 nautical mile range of your Harpoons, which seems like it puts you at a massive disadvantage when you're going up against the Soviets with their 700 kilometer range surface-to-surface missiles. But while it's kind of true that in naval combat, he who shoots first usually wins, you can't shoot at anything that you can't detect. And with American air power, they usually get the detection advantage. They certainly did in this scenario, because the US forces have that E-3 Sentry that's still orbiting Guam, painting my entire force with its surface search radar, and detecting any missile launches as well. So yeah, I've got all these great missiles with absolutely fantastic range, but I've never really been able to use that range advantage. And despite the range advantage of my missiles, we have lost a ship from a Harpoon attack, launched from something that I hadn't detected. Well, possibly. The jury's still out whether or not those Harpoons were launched from the ships that I had just sunk. They might have been, but they might not. It might have been launched from whatever this is. And I think whatever this is just shot down one of my SSN-12s. Let's slow time down again, or set it to normal speed. I certainly didn't see any incoming missiles. I mean, look at the speed that these SSN-12s are doing. More than 1,200, nearly 1,300 knots. Oh, message just popped up. One of the SSN-12s just got spoofed by defensive jamming. And I think one of them did just get shot down. So I've only got the 2. I mean, it's only whatever that is, one SSN-12 is going to be enough to sink it. But we still have to deal with its close-in weapon system. And I only have the 1 missile left. Well, I got plenty more back in the surface action group, but I've only got the 1 missile left in flight. So whatever this is homing in on, I mean, we still have to beat its close-in weapon systems, but it's certainly capable of taking care of itself. That wasn't bad, actually. I mean, okay, we hit it. And I still don't know what it was. But of the 4 missiles fired, it either jammed, decoyed, or intercepted 3. That's not bad. Later that day, we find the final American surface unit. It's a Knox-class frigate, and yes, that helicopter is booking it out of there because somebody just fired a missile at him. We're getting it down to the deck and launching chaff. However, because I know it's a Knox-class frigate, I know that its missiles only have a 10 nautical mile range. Well, ish. Certainly the helicopter's safe. The enemy frigate, however, not so much. I'm not quite sure what it's doing. I mean, the reason why I sent the helo in to investigate, because again, this thing was only doing 7 knots, but he seems to be reversing. He's heading astern. Not quite sure what the point of that manoeuvre is. Maybe he sees us coming. I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. But I'm reasonably sure that this is all the Americans have left. And there is no way a single Knox-class frigate is... Well, he may as well abandon ship now. I mean, the Knox was a decent general-purpose frigate back in the day. But its day was in the 1960s. I mean, the Knox was more or less obsolete by the time the Oliver Hazard Perrys came into service. And they came into service 10 years before this game was set. I mean, the Knox was a decent anti-submarine warfare platform back in its day, but its day was 1965. It's now 1985, and a 20-year-old anti-submarine warfare frigate just stands no chance against the Soviet, well, anything. It's a waste of the second missile. It was going to be optimistic in the extreme to expect a Knox-class frigate to be able to take even one of these missiles out. And it didn't, but we may as well watch the explosion as the SSN-19 finishes the job. Not that it needed to, the first hit was enough. The only remaining American asset, at least as far as I'm aware, but I'm reasonably confident, is the E-3 Sentry, the AWACS. And I'm going to have to close to within 50 nautical miles to shoot that thing down. And even at 32 knots, that takes the entire rest of the day. And it ain't going to shoot itself down, is it? But this is the only real gripe that I have with this scenario, because I've taken care of every American surface unit. I was fortunate enough that in this version of the scenario I didn't have any submarines to deal with, or that could have gotten tricky. There it is. I've neutralised all enemy assets, and all it cost me was a frigate and a helicopter. I mean, I massively outnumbered them. I'm actually kind of surprised that that's all they had. But the point is, I've sunk everything. And anything that I haven't sunk, I've shot down. But I still can't complete the scenario until the Johnny-come-latelys in the Amphibious assault force make it into the invasion zone. And they're crawling along at 12 knots because that's the best speed of the transports. And they're still 150 nautical miles away, which means I had to spend the whole day getting the Kirov and Kiev battle group close enough to shoot down the A... Well, I didn't have to. More on that in a bit. But I spent the whole day getting the strike force close enough to shoot down the AWACS, at which point there are no remaining American units, and that really should be game over, except it isn't. Because in order to actually get the scenario complete and achieve the decisive victory, I have to get the Amphibious force into the invasion zone. And yes, one of the Krivac 2s ran itself aground. As I was moving the Kiev battle group close enough to get within surface-to-air missile launcher range of the AWACS. Yeah, that's a thing that happened. And this isn't the only scenario, by the way, that has these just kind of silly victory conditions. I mean, if there's nothing left for you to fight, then you've won, right? But the mission trigger says that you have to get the invasion force into the invasion zone before it's game over. Even though there's nothing left to stop the invasion force from getting in the invasion zone, but no, you have to dot every I and cross every T, otherwise the game refuses to give you the victory. And this is not the only scenario that suffers from this problem. And it's just annoying because this scenario should have been successfully completed hours ago. And I realise, it's early access, the game's still a work in progress, and the developers do listen to criticism. And, well, this is exactly the kind of criticism that they need to hear. But despite the kind of wonky win conditions, that was a very enjoyable scenario. It's not often I do actually play them from the Soviet side. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you're all having a great weekend. And if you want a much more in-depth explanation of exactly what the missile sponge is and why it works, then I do encourage you to check out the link in the video description to a video posted by an actual Oliver Hazard Perry class frigate sensor operator who explains it in far better detail than I possibly could. But I hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.